Picture your life transformed in an instant, where familiar routines now seem confusing and each day brings new unanswered questions. What does it take to survive a brain injury, and how do you piece together your future when support seems out of reach? Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Mind Matters, Navigating Head Injuries and Concussions. I'm your host, Kyla Como. I'm the legal nurse consultant here at Shane Smith Law, and today I'm honored to speak with Dawn Zompty. Dawn is a traumatic brain injury survivor whose recovery journey began with the shock and confusion of her injury, and through perseverance and hard work has blossomed into one of advocacy and hope. Today, Dawn will share unique insights into brain injury treatment, family dynamics, and personal growth. In this first part of our conversation, Dawn shares what life was like before her injury, how it happened, and the challenges she and her support system faced in the aftermath. What you're about to hear is a story of resilience, vulnerability, and hope, offering a window into the realities of brain injury and recovery. Dawn, it's a real pleasure to have you on the show with us today.
Thank you, Kylie. So grateful to be here.
Yeah, we've been excited to talk with you for a while now, so let's get right into it. Let's start with, how about you tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, and kind of what your life looked like before the brain injury happened.
Yeah, so it's been almost 4 years since my sort of key accident. Before that, I was working full-time remotely. It was 2021 as a kind of a unique niche role as a visual designer for a small facilitation and consulting agency. I'd just been in Port Townsend, Washington for about a year. I had just moved recently from Austin, Texas. And actually I had a pretty stressful, I felt like pretty stressful day to day as far as the workload I had. And I kind of actually wasn't sure what I wanted to do next with my life. And I was in a new town, it was the pandemic, and so I hadn't really met a lot of people yet, but I had really wanted to move to Washington and the Pacific Northwest for a while, so I was happy to be there in a very different bioregion from Texas. So,
no doubt about it. It's a beautiful area of the country, the Northwest. So you had moved up to a brand new area. You don't know a whole lot of people. This accident happened. How did your injury happen? Are you comfortable sharing a little bit about those circumstances?
Yeah, I am. Yeah, so I think what's interesting for me in my life is it seems like I tend to have accidents when I'm stressed out. I'm otherwise pretty coordinated. Been an athlete most of my life, very, very active. But yeah, I had experienced just a couple months in 2021. It's notable for me to say that I had experienced, besides the pandemic, but also a couple of really intense losses, personal losses, with a friend actually taking his own life in August of that year, and then a couple months later actually losing a coworker, a close friend that was my coworker, to domestic abuse. I'll leave out the details, but both really, really intense experiences and losses. And so it was December of 2021. And I had actually been grieving a lot. I was a part of a group where a grief circle, among other things. And so I had been really deep in my grief. And so actually that day in December, it was sunny and clear and dry, which is very rare that time of year up here. So I went out for a run on this beach. I lived in this little coastal town, and I got to the end of the jetty, which I'd been to many times, and I checked the boulders. Like, the jetty's made up of all these big chunks of concrete that had been built up, and everything was really dry. So I was up in this spot, and I was in this, it's a state park called Fort Worden. And so it used to be a fort. So there's this old concrete platform where something used to be. And so that's where I was going. And I didn't think about it. I took one step on this big driftwood log that had at some point washed up, and it was super slick. And still being pretty new to the area, I just didn't think about that, yeah, that time of year, driftwood is really slick. So I lost my footing immediately, and I thought I would just land on my butt and that would be it, but I kept tumbling in this sort of weird split-second kind of way and ended up doing sort of a 180 and landed on my knees and hands, and my momentum all had me move forward, basically like diving and landing with my head wedged like right here between a big rock and another driftwood log. And I heard a crack in my head, like inside of me, you know, as if I had my ears plugged. Like if you know, when you're chewing on something and you can hear it crunching, it's kind of like that. So that's what happened. I don't think I lost consciousness. I stood up pretty quickly, looked around. Nobody had seen it happen. So I sort of just stood there and assessed myself. And in that moment, I seemed pretty okay, you know. Yeah, I was, you know, probably also nervous of what it might mean, but maybe at the same time didn't really want to believe anything was wrong.
A little bit of shock, a lot of adrenaline, I'm sure, coursing through your veins at that point.
I'd imagine so. You know, I actually ended up running back down the beach, which in hindsight was maybe not a good decision for the injuries I had sustained, which a lot of that was actually my neck, besides my head and my brain. And I told my physical therapist that later, and he sort of cringed.
Yeah.
So.
I'm cringing as you talk about it too. My background is nursing, so I'm picturing all of this, and can only imagine what you must have looked like running back up the beach. That just sounded like a horrible incident. So you get up. That's amazing in and of itself, and you're able to get back going, you know, back to your house, I imagine. What happened next? What was that immediate aftermath of when did it start to set in on you that something wasn't right? What can you remember about those early days, really?
Yeah, so that later that same day, I talked to a friend who is a naturopathic doctor, and she asked me a few questions, you know, the kind of basic questions like, did I lose consciousness? And, you know, was I nauseous? And those sort of things. And she was like, well, it sounds like you're pretty okay, so just see how things go. So yeah, I had a week or two left of work before we all took this 2-week time off together collectively as a company. And yeah, a few things were really noticeable. I was on Zoom a lot, you know, working remotely, and I would lose my train of thought mid-sentence, and it was almost like the words went out and then they would come back, and I could usually complete the thought, but there was this weird gap that hadn't ever been there before. And after Zoom calls, I noticed I felt particularly fatigued, exhausted. And the other thing that was super noticeable was once I was on break, I was reading. I love learning, so I was reading this book about permaculture, and I would read one sentence and it was gone immediately. So yeah, those were my initial noticings. I had to take a lot of naps during the day while I'd be working.
That sounds about right. Sounds like a significant concussion just based on those few symptoms you described. I want to pause it and pose a question to our audience. if any of you have experienced this kind of life-altering or sudden severe type injury, what stands out to you the most about those early days in your recovery? Share your thoughts and your comments below. It definitely helps our community kind of get an idea of what everybody else has faced and what's been helpful to them. So, Don, back to you. How did you and those that love you come to really understand the extent of your injury? So you kind of led us through the early days. Things aren't seeming quite right. What happened next? How did that play out for you?
Yeah, I'd say, well, it really took a while. I'd say it was about a process of an entire year. It seemed like initially I was getting better. I didn't, I would have a headache here and there. I had to take naps, and I had this feeling like of being out of it, but it wasn't my first concussion. It wasn't my first accident, and I was used to just getting better. But things happened through the course of that first year where I hit my head a couple more times. And in about June of that year, I went to the ER with heat exhaustion from hiking a mountain, and I couldn't stop vomiting, and those kind of things were just new. It was just new to me. And so by the end of that year, I had lost my job, and
Wow.
I had left my housing. My housing had gone up from $650 to $850 a month. I was living in this really small little shack on somebody's property, which is not abnormal for the area. There's a real housing crisis here. And so I was staying with my mother, actually, and she really didn't understand that I wasn't okay. And I think in some ways I was still processing that I wasn't okay. And I remember I had to really very directly, I feel like more than once, say like, I'm not okay and things are happening. So it eventually she heard me, but I guess it took me a long time to realize it, and it took her a while to realize it as well.
That's not an uncommon story. We've had several brain injury survivors on the show in the past, and we get shades of that to some lesser or greater degrees from most of those guests. So you're definitely not alone in that. It's a tough thing to pick up on. Did your mother know that you had sustained that head injury those several months prior to that?
I would imagine I had told her. Yeah, I am close to my mother, and generally I tell her what's going on in my life. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I tell her something way later, and she's like, "You never told me that." But I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I kept her pretty up to date.
Yeah, but I think you said December was your injury, and then that was around June-ish. So I mean, it's a lot of months to have passed, and connecting those dots might be difficult at that point. That could be complicated. So I appreciate that. That's interesting. I would like to hear your insights on the medical system. So certainly you got plugged into. I heard you talking about a physical therapist. Did you get plugged into medical doctor, whether it's naturopathic or medical doctors? What was that part of your journey like?
It was challenging, and I know I'm not alone in this either. So at the time of my accident, I was working full time, but our company didn't offer healthcare. And I wasn't making so much that I felt super comfortable with paying for healthcare myself, healthcare insurance. So initially, I didn't go to a doctor because, I've been to doctors in the past for other things, and I felt like they'd give me some ibuprofen and tell me to rest, and that would be about it. So like I said, I spoke to my friend who's a naturopath. She gave me her initial bill of okay, and I didn't see anyone until June. I went to the ER. So at that point we did have healthcare insurance, thankfully, and that was I guess that was the first time I had gone in since my accident, and that was what it was. It was actually very traumatic. I think in some ways maybe more traumatic than the initial accident. They were, giving me fluids intravenously, and I had this awful migraine that wouldn't go away. And I was still throwing up, and my body was just shaking uncontrollably while it was happening, and I was definitely scared for my life. In retrospect, I knew I was going to be okay, but at that moment, I was definitely in a fight or flight, fearful state. And it was several months after that. It was actually like probably a month after that where I started having headaches that wouldn't go away, that would turn into migraines. And so I finally did go to a doctor. It's also, it takes forever to see a doctor out here. I'm in a more rural area. I'm not in the Seattle area. So healthcare, it's just another challenge of being out here is getting seen in a timely fashion. And I told him I was really having trouble sleeping at that point and had these headaches that wouldn't go away. And he was just, it was not a positive experience for me. He gave me a sheet on sleep hygiene, which I had already dealt with insomnia in the past. And he told me that until you start sleeping, we can't treat your headaches. And don't expect you're gonna start sleeping better tomorrow. It's gonna take time. And he was just gruff with me in general when I asked him if I could have an MRI. He told me he'd give me a CT scan, but that it probably wouldn't show anything. And when I told him I took CBD oil, he was like, well, why do you take that? He was very judgmental. At least it felt that way.
Yeah.
And so that was my initial experience, which was super, super not helpful. I already knew all the sleep hygiene stuff. So it took me quite a while before I went back and saw another doctor just because of the experience I'd had.
Yeah, that is, I hate to hear that. And I'm sorry you had to go through that. We here at Shane Smith Law, part of my role is I meet with our attorneys and in case management team every week, and we talk about the cases that our clients are still treating their injuries in, and we do have a fair amount of clients that are in those rural, more remote areas, and access, as you mentioned, is a challenge, and that's very, very frustrating. To see clients or patients like yourself, people that have been injured and just can't get the help they need simply because they just don't have transportation. They live too far to get to a place. Were you able to get connected? I heard you say that put you off for a little while, understandably so. We hear that quite a bit too. Did telephonic medicine or telemed come into play for you at all? Was that helpful? Were you able to access care through that method?
I did, but it wasn't for probably another year or so. I think I lost my job. Before that, I went on short-term leave for 3 months. I was really freaked out. I was just so stressed out and triggered, besides the impact of my accidents. It took me quite a while. It's just like my life was slowly crumbling until I was at my mother's house. And it was hard for me to be there as well because of certain family dynamics. And I had seen another naturopath who I had started working with regularly, and she had told me basically it takes everybody a different amount of time to heal. And she recommended some supplements, and that was pretty much it. So that was the other half of the experience, I guess, that I had, that I was just basically told it would take time. Yeah. Which now I know is not totally true at all.
Yeah, I mean, it can take time, but it doesn't have to take as long as maybe it did in your case, though. You're right. Wow. I hear you talking about your mother. You talk about friends. When you have a brain injury, the support system is such an important component of getting back to, I hate to even say normal, a new normal maybe even, but did you have a support system around you who was able to advocate for you when you couldn't do that?
Yeah, so that took, that was a big learning curve for me.
Mhm.
For one thing, asking for help is not something I was used to doing. And secondly, I didn't really know what I could ask for help with or how to ask for help. That first year and a half, I really didn't have a lot of support.
Mhm.
Um, and part of that was just, again, I didn't know that I needed it. I had, a few friendships that were and are still important. They weren't local though, and so I would talk to them on the phone, which was hugely helpful. Just to be heard really was really important, but it took a lot of time and effort for more support to show up. And that being like the first really like I'd say it was a year later, and then it was March. So what, about 15 months later, I did find a support group that was hugely helpful because I, at that point, wasn't staying with my mom and I was pretty isolated. And I just spoke with one of the volunteers who was a retired nurse, and her insight, her son had his own TBI journey, and so she was connected in that way. And then a part of this nonprofit support group based in Portland, Oregon. And that, just being connected to them, and they would have meetings every other Saturday on Zoom together, that was hugely helpful. It was the first time I found people that understood what it was like, and just, could empathize at the very least, and made some suggestions about different types of healthcare I could look into.
I think that's a great point. I know we're getting kind of closer to time for this episode. I know we're going to come back and talk some more, and I think we're at a good segue here, because I'm starting to hear some momentum building in the recovery part. I love that you mentioned, and you started off with this. You had been grieving some deep losses before your injury happened. You had gotten connected with a community of other people who were walking that same journey, and now, after your injury, you've now gotten connected to a group, a community who was again walking that same path, and that's so key. I'm a big advocate of finding others who can help walk with you. So thank you for sharing that. We're gonna get more into that. Don, before we sign out for this episode, is there anything you'd like to, based on what we've talked about so far, is there anything you'd like to leave our listeners with before we head into episode 2?
Recovery is not a linear process. As much as I wish that it was, it doesn't seem to be linear in my experience.
I think that is apropos. I always picture it more of a, kind of a bit of a squiggly line, if you will. Exactly. I think that's well said. Well, that's going to do it, everybody, for another episode of Mind Matters, Navigating Head Injuries and Concussions. I want to extend our heartfelt thanks to Dawn Somebody for sharing the first part of her powerful story. I hope you found today's conversation insightful and that it brought a greater understanding to the earliest, often hardest phases of recovering from a brain injury. If Dawn's experience resonated with you or someone you care about, please be sure to join us for part 2, where we'll dive deeper into Dawn's recovery, identity, and advocacy work. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel so you won't miss part 2 in all of our future episodes. Leave us a comment with your thoughts. Share your own story, because we love hearing from our audience. Sharing your insights might help someone out there who is struggling. As always, remember, if you're in pain, call Shane at 980-999-9999. We'll see you next time.
In pain, so I call Shane. 980-999-9999. In pain, call Shane.